People assumed that if something truly dangerous existed, we would know about it, that governments would warn us, that history would record it. But some of the most disturbing experiments were never meant to be acknowledged at all. No press releases, no official documents, just fragments, leaked testimonies, erased files, and stories that refuse to disappear. Tonight, we're not talking about conspiracy theories for entertainment. We're talking about experiments that multiple sources claim existed, but were officially denied. Projects that may have crossed ethical lines so extreme they were buried rather than explained. These are the secret experiments that officially never happened. In 1943, at the height of World War II, the U.S. Navy was desperate for an advantage that could turn the tide of the war. According to unconfirmed but persistent accounts, this desperation led to an experiment so radical that it was erased from official history. The Philadelphia experiment allegedly involved the USS Eldridge, a naval destroyer escort, and an attempt to render it invisible to enemy radar using powerful electromagnetic fields. Witnesses claimed that during the test, a strange green fog enveloped the ship. Moments later, it vanished completely, not just from radar, but from physical sight. Some accounts state the ship reappeared miles away before returning to its original location. When it came back, crew members were reportedly missing, disoriented, or fused into the metal structure of the vessel itself. The Navy has always denied this ever occurred, attributing the story to confusion with routine degaussing procedures. But survivors and leaked letters suggest something went catastrophically wrong. Decades later, another kind of experiment surfaced, one that didn't involve machines, but the human mind. During the Cold War, intelligence agencies feared that enemies might weaponize psychic abilities. This fear led to a classified program later known as the Stargate Project. Officially, the program investigated remote viewing, the alleged ability to perceive distant locations using only the mind. What remains unclear is how far the experiments truly went. Participants described being placed in sensory-deprived rooms, guided into altered mental states, and asked to describe enemy installations they had never seen. While some documents were eventually declassified, large portions remain redacted. Critics claim the project was ineffective. Others argue that if it had truly failed, it would not have lasted over 2 decades. Many believe Stargate was never shut down, only renamed and buried deeper. Around the same time, another form of experimentation was quietly unfolding, one that aimed not at the mind, but at the environment itself. In the early 1950s, the British government conducted cloud seeding operations under what became known as Project Cumulus. Officially, the goal was to study weather manipulation. Unofficially, critics claim these tests caused catastrophic flooding shortly after their execution. Villages were destroyed, lives were lost. The connection was denied, and the project quietly ended. What troubled investigators was not just the damage, but how quickly responsibility vanished. No public accountability, no admissions, just silence. The idea that governments could manipulate weather was labeled dangerous speculation, despite mounting circumstantial evidence. But perhaps the most unsettling rumors are those that suggest some experiments never involved technology or science at all, but communication with something unknown. Reports surfaced online describing alleged CIA-funded initiatives involving psychic networks and channeled entities. Projects with obscure names, allegedly designed to interact with non-human intelligences through altered consciousness. No documents confirm these claims, no officials acknowledge them. Yet similar stories appear across unrelated sources decades apart, and that raises a question no government has ever answered directly. If these experiments never happened, why do so many people remember them the same way? In the Soviet Union, secrecy was not an exception, it was policy. During the late 1970s, reports began circulating about a classified organization known only as Institute 22. Officially, it did not exist. Unofficially, it was said to operate under direct military control, tasked with investigating unidentified aerial phenomena and encounters reported by civilians, pilots, and soldiers. According to leaked testimonies, witnesses who encountered strange objects were immediately detained, interrogated, and ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements. In some cases, entire incidents were erased from local records, flights rerouted, radar logs altered. Institute 22 allegedly collected physical evidence, biological samples, and detailed witness statements, all of which vanished into sealed archives when the Soviet Union collapsed. What disturbed researchers most was the consistency of reports: objects defying known physics, sudden electromagnetic failures, and physical effects on humans: nausea, burns, memory loss. Russian officials dismissed these accounts as Cold War paranoia, but former military personnel continue to tell the same stories decades later, with nothing to gain. Meanwhile, across the ocean, another form of secret experimentation was unfolding, one hidden not behind ideology, but behind innovation. In the United States, advanced aerospace development was funneled through facilities so classified they didn't officially appear on maps. Among them was Skunk Works, Lockheed Martin's advanced development division. While officially responsible for stealth aircraft and experimental jets, rumors persist that some projects went far beyond conventional engineering. Former employees and whistleblowers have claimed that unidentified craft were studied in isolated facilities, not designed but recovered, materials that could not be cut, propulsion systems without visible engines, objects that responded to proximity rather than controls. None of this has been acknowledged officially, yet recent government statements confirming the existence of unidentified aerial phenomena have only intensified speculation. If nothing unusual ever existed, critics ask, why the sudden shift in language? Then there are the experiments that blur the line between science fiction and reality. Over the past decade, DARPA has openly researched brain-computer interfaces, but according to persistent online reports, classified versions of these programs explored something far more invasive: synthetic telepathy. The alleged goal was direct brain-to-brain communication without speech, devices capable of transmitting thoughts, images, or commands. Supporters of the theory point to patents, leaked presentations, and whistleblower claims suggesting that early versions were tested on volunteers and possibly without consent. Official statements insist these technologies are experimental and limited, but if even a fraction of these claims are true, it would mean the human mind itself became a testing ground. At this point, you might be wondering where the line is between speculation and reality. That's exactly the problem. These experiments exist in a space where denial is expected, where confirmation would be more damaging than silence, and where the absence of evidence is not proof of absence, only proof of control. If you're still watching, take a moment to ask yourself why these stories are never taught, never fully addressed, and never closed. If you want more deep investigations like this, make sure you're subscribed, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. The more people engage, the harder it becomes for stories like these to stay buried. Because the deeper we dig, the more it feels like these experiments weren't abandoned. They were perfected. And in the next part, we'll examine the cases that suggest the testing didn't stop. It simply moved into the shadows. Not all secret experiments leave behind documents or hardware. Some leave behind people. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, scattered reports began surfacing from civilians, soldiers, and researchers who claimed to have participated in programs they could barely remember. The details were always fragmented: missing time, recurring nightmares, sudden termination from military service, or medical files sealed without explanation. What connected these stories was a recurring theme: experimentation on human perception, memory, and behavior. Some participants described being exposed to sound frequencies designed to induce fear, obedience, or disorientation. Others spoke of visual stimuli paired with electromagnetic fields intended to alter cognitive states. Officially, such programs were dismissed as psychological research or stress testing. Unofficially, the testimonies suggest something far more invasive: attempts to rewire the human response to reality itself. One particularly disturbing category of rumors involves experiments in isolation and sensory deprivation. Subjects were allegedly placed in environments where light, sound, and time cues were manipulated. Days blurred into hours, hours into minutes. When participants were released, many reported permanent anxiety, hallucinations, or emotional detachment. No agency has ever admitted to running large-scale tests of this nature, yet similar descriptions emerge across different countries and decades. Then there are the stories involving children. Unverified but persistent claims suggest that certain classified programs recruited individuals at a very young age, not for physical testing, but for neurological adaptability. Children whose brains are still developing were believed to be more receptive to altered perception, enhanced intuition, or accelerated learning under extreme conditions. No documentation confirms this. No official investigation exists. And yet survivors of such alleged programs describe eerily similar procedures, language, and symbols, despite never having known each other. As technology advanced, so did the nature of these experiments. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, reports shifted toward digital integration. Subjects described being connected to machines that monitored brain activity in real time, allegedly to map emotional responses and predict behavior. Some claimed these systems could anticipate decisions before the subject was consciously aware of making them. If true, such technology would represent not surveillance of actions, but surveillance of intention. Governments publicly deny conducting unauthorized human experimentation. Laws and conventions are cited. Ethics boards are referenced. But history has shown that ethical lines are often acknowledged only after they are crossed. And here's what makes these stories impossible to dismiss entirely. Many of the people who came forward gained nothing. No money, no fame. Some faced ridicule. Others lost careers. A few retracted their statements later, not because they were disproven, but because of pressure. What if secrecy isn't about hiding failure, but about hiding success? If experiments worked, even partially, the implications would be enormous. Control over perception, influence over decision-making, access to human cognition before awareness itself, powers that would never be announced publicly because they wouldn't need to be. And if that's true, then the question isn't whether these experiments happened, it's whether they ever truly stopped. In the final part, we'll confront why so many of these programs vanish from records and what that silence might be protecting. Every secret experiment shares the same final phase: silence. Files are sealed, budgets are reclassified, programs are renamed or dissolved on paper, while their core ideas quietly migrate elsewhere. Official statements reduce decades of activity to failed research or theoretical exploration, and the public moves on because there is nothing concrete to argue against. But patterns don't lie. Again and again, the same elements appear across unrelated cases: missing data, redacted names, identical testimony from people who never met, and sudden shifts in policy that are never fully explained. These aren't the signs of imagination, they're the signs of containment. Governments insist that secrecy exists for national security, and sometimes that's true. But secrecy is also convenient when accountability would raise questions no one wants answered. Questions about consent, about morality, about how far research went before someone decided it went too far to admit. What makes these experiments especially disturbing isn't just what might have been tested, but what might have worked. Remote perception that produced usable intelligence. Weather manipulation that couldn't be controlled. Cognitive technologies capable of influencing thought before awareness. Aerospace systems that defied known physics. If even one of these succeeded, public disclosure wouldn't be a risk. It would be a loss of control. That's why denial becomes permanent. Not because nothing happened, but because admitting it would change how we see history, power, and ourselves. And maybe that's why so many of these stories never end with conclusions. No final reports, no public apologies, no closure for those involved. Just the quiet understanding that some knowledge was never meant to leave the room where it was discovered. The most effective experiments are not the ones we remember. They're the ones we're trained to forget. If these programs truly never happened, then the sheer number of consistent accounts makes no sense. And if they did happen, then the real question becomes uncomfortable. What else is happening right now that we won't acknowledge for decades? Somewhere, research is being conducted behind closed doors, under different names, with better technology, with deeper secrecy, and when future generations look back, they'll ask the same question we're asking now. How much was hidden, and why? If this video made you question what you thought you knew, make sure you're subscribed. More investigations are coming. We enter into real cases, classified histories, and the stories that exist in the space between denial and truth. Leave a comment with the experiment you believe was the most disturbing, or whether you think the truth is still unfolding. Because history doesn't erase mistakes, it just waits until we're ready to see them.